My name is Siddharth Jhavar. The next keynote speaker is Mr. Vinod Rai. And most of us already know a lot about Mr. Rai. There are three important things which I want to point out. Firstly, his diversity of experience. Mr. Rai started his career as an IAS officer. He started with running a district, then had multiple positions in the state government of Kerala, moved on to the central government, where he was in the finance ministry, the commerce ministry, and the defense ministry. Eventually, he became the secretary, which is the topmost bureaucrat of financial services. He then became, as we all know, the Comptroller and Auditor General of India, and brought a new meaning and dignity to that role by investigating scams worth lakhs of crores of rupees. Secondly, whenever the governments or courts are looking for someone to head an organization, someone who is honest and stern and effective, Mr. Vinod Rai's name is always top on the list. And thirdly, you may or may not know this, Mr. Vinod Rai is also an alumnus of Harvard University. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a lot of privilege to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Vinod Rai. Please give him a big round of applause.
Thanks, Siddharth. Ladies and gentlemen from and in Harvard today, thank you very much for having me amongst all of you today. I'm grateful to Siddharth and his colleagues for reaching out to me to come and spend some time with each one of you today. It's not often that an auditor gets an opportunity to stand before people and express his views. You're all, most of you must be from the corporate world. Nobody loves an auditor. And least of all does he want to see him in flesh and blood, standing before you on a lovely Sunday morning. And I had a sneaking suspicion, which I expressed to Siddharth, that you have a scintillating speaker like Harish Salve in the morning, and you look forward to Dr. Shashi Tharoor in the afternoon, and you put the auditor in between the hyphen. Auditor always gets treated very unfairly, Siddharth, so I'll pardon you for that. But the name of the game is, if Harvard beckons, it's irresistible. And coming back to Cambridge is an excellent opportunity. I jumped at the offer, and I'm here before you. Now, the subject which has been entrusted to me, let us take a while, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, let me take you back in time to give you a perspective on where India is today. At the turn of the millennium, India was clocking near double-digit growth. You will all accept. In fact, Mr. Salve also mentioned that we had debunked the myth of what was the Hindu rate of growth, 3%, 2.5% over 40 years. We had consolidated on the reforms of 1991. We had weathered the storm of 1997, Asian Tigers, when they were folding up in Asia. We had, in fact, introduced VAT, and we were hoping that GST would follow very soon. The story has panned out very differently. Golden Quadrilateral, License Raj, lots of things had been put aside. And if few people recall, we went to the elections in 2004 with the slogan, India Shining. Now, the polity probably did not accept India was shining, so the government changed in 2004, and we had. Now, that was the time when the external environment was benign, and 7.5%, 8% growth was absolutely no problem for India. But it was somewhere after the meltdown, the financial meltdown, when the external environment turned slightly adverse, that we started seeing signs of stress within the country. India had got accustomed to what I would call a coalition government being in the saddle. Coalitions had perfected the art of governance. But probably post-2006, post-2007, what started happening was a coalition which comprised regional parties and the major party. The regional parties started exercising influence which was largely disproportionate to the size that they had in parliament. You had turf issues of the kind that on the one hand, if I hold, say, the Ministry of Civil Aviation, it's mine. My coalition partner has no say in it. If I hold the Ministry of Telecom, it's totally mine. Issues don't concern the Ministry of Finance or anybody else. I call the shots in it. If it's the Railway Ministry that I have, well, that turf is entirely mine. There were regional issues also, regional issues of the kind that if the Prime Minister has to be traveling to to Bangladesh and sign a Teesta Water Treaty, the West Bengal, it doesn't suit them. They prevail upon the Prime Minister not to sign the treaty. If the Prime Minister has to travel to Sri Lanka, it does not suit the then government in Tamil Nadu because of Tamils, the way they were handled in Sri Lanka. They prevail upon the Prime Minister not to travel to Sri Lanka, and ultimately India gets represented to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting by only the External Affairs Minister. Now, these were the kind of situations that were coming about. There were also instances where each one of these coalition partners had seen turfs wanting the turf to be handed over to their group of people, which otherwise has been coined by the Bombay Club as cronies. These cronies may not necessarily have had domain experience. These cronies may not necessarily have had the financial wherewithal to be able to implement the projects that they were being handed out. But being part of that political setup, they were handed the contracts. And what happened is for all of us to see, they were heavily financially over-leveraged. They could not deliver in time. Of course, there were problems of getting statutory clearances, but large infrastructure projects kept getting held up. Huge amount of debt went into what was known as the corporate debt restructuring setup, which had been created for a very noble cause. But unfortunately, it was getting clogged by people who had over-assessed their debt requirements, where an entirely new economic principle was being written in the sense that losses were being sought to be written off not against equity as it normally should happen, but as against debt. And that is why we have most of these projects which remain stuck for about 6 to 8 years now. Now, this was roughly around the time when citizenry at large in India became far more discerning, became far more demanding. They were seeking accountability from their government. They were seeking accountability from those who were in power. You had the Anna Hazare movement. You had lots of things like that come out, spill out in the streets, and I think that was a very healthy development. The Gen Next or the Gen Y, which can put its government on notice and tell the government that, look, you sit in a glass house. Every action of yours is going to be closely watched by us. And not only so, we will hold you accountable for that action. Somewhere down the line, probably the auditor also got into the act. Media, which Mr. Salve mentioned, plays it up, often is on overdrive, no doubt about that. Started indicating what was happening in our preparedness for the Commonwealth Games and things like that. Probably some misdemeanors of those in power came out into public domain. May have been through media, may have been through audit reports, may have been through lots of other leaks which have become a formula, or discussions which were taking place in Parliament. But these were causing great amount of discomfort and concern to the population of that time. Now, there is often talk of overreach by pillars of democracy, maybe the judiciary, maybe at times the parliament, maybe the executive, and at that point of time, fingers were certainly being pointed towards the auditor. But I have a simple question to ask. Governance, administration in a parliamentary democracy or in a democracy is a zero-sum game. You have the judiciary, you have the legislature, you have the executive. If any one of these pillars cedes space, the other one gets into that space, occupies that space quickly. It's a natural phenomenon. It will happen. And I think it's very unfair to say that there was outreach of anybody. After all, where does the citizen get justice? Which doorstep does he get to? Which portal does he approach and gets a response for whatever is the problem that is agitating him at that point of time? That was the time maybe the judiciary or the auditor did what they did. But I have another question to ask, and that is, maybe let's not accept that, as we call it, 176 crores worth of losses were taking place. No, we did not say that. It's not that the government was losing that kind of money or the treasury was losing that kind of money. That's why we call it presumptive loss. But look at it from the other point of view. If you put out a report in Parliament and say that in the import of pulses in the country, 32,000 crores have been lost, it comes out in the media for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days. There is some agitation in Parliament. Over the week, it's all forgotten. Next week, it's business as usual. If you put out a report and say, in grant of maybe an ultra-mega power project, something else, 23,000 crores have been lost. Same phenomenon. It's discussed, debated, and then heat and fire. Over the weekend, it's all lost. Some other crisis has overtaken us. If you put out a figure of 176,000 crores, there is an alarm signal. You are red flagging something, and you need to catch the public's imagination on what is happening within the government. And I think in a country seeking to be a superpower, a country seeking to compete with China, in a country seeking to bring about sustainable economic development, you need to have transparency, probity, and ethics in public life. And I think some corrections were required. Corrections hopefully did come about. The courts stood by the general public, aspirations of the public. Maybe there was overreach. Maybe you could argue that 176,000 crores worth of losses were really not faced by the Treasury. But please, How many of you, and when I say how many of you, I'm conscious as I stand before you, that I stand before some of the brightest minds in the world today. How many of you can stand up, put your hands on your hearts and say, no wrong was being committed at that point of time? Now, if you perceive a situation of that kind, you need to take some corrective steps. And I think, forget the courts, forget the government, forget Parliament, public at large did a tremendous job in coming out and demanding transparency from the government in power, because in a parliamentary democracy, you hand over your right of governing to that instrument whom you have voted to power, and they perform the role on your behalf. Not only so, when the government passes a budget, when the government expends money, it's your money. You and I have absolutely no liberty to decide how much of tax to pay. We pay our tax. And it's our right to know that that money which has been collected from the taxes that we have paid, how well has it been spent? Has it been spent for my welfare? Or has it been non-optimally or non-optimally spent? And that's why I think the public at large, in fact, Gen Next, it was Gen Young who came out on the streets of Parliament and started demanding a response from government. And I think come 2014, elections happened. It was the same Gen Next to Gen Y which ensured that a single party majority government was brought into power. And I think in a large number of ways, government has started bringing things out into the open and doing them the way they need to be done. The Jan Dhan program, which brought in about 240 million accounts, 250 million accounts, was an excellent program where each of the inaccessible areas where the public had no access to formal banking was being brought into the banking fold. Attempts were being made to introduce the goods and services tax. Politics in the country being what it is, that very party which espoused that cause when it was in government gets out of government and then comes back and starts objecting to it. But that's politics. That's democracy. We have to live it. It's the bounden duty of the government in power to be able to manage the floor in Parliament such that it can bring about a synergy of ideas to ensure that they contribute to the good of every. Now, that was roughly around the time that when I talked of the corporate debt restructuring in the beginning, banks were under stress. And an outcome of a report submitted by Dr. P.J. Nayak, then CEO of Axis Bank, was to set up a Banks Board Bureau and bring in certain corrective measures. An excellent initiative taken by government because more than what has been fulfilled, it indicates the intent of government and what was one of the objectives of that report that Dr. Nayak submitted, which is part of the roadmap for the Banks Board Bureau, that public sector banks have over the years suffered and probably succumbed to a huge amount of political influence coming from the government. This caused them huge amount of hiccups. Now, one of the objectives of the Banks Board Bureau is to, over a period of time, set up a bank investment company, which will be a holding company to which the stakes of government will be hived off and warehoused into that holding company. That holding company will be run by professionals to try and ensure that that political influence that these banks were being subject to is distanced. That professionals do get appointed to these public sector banks, and on the whole, the management of the banks is professionalized. We are in that process. May take 2 years, may take 3 years, but it is indicative of the intent of government that they are willing to distance itself from the management of these banks. Appointments are being done by the Banks Bureau. Appointments of professionals have been taken up. We have recommended a whole suite of HR issues where the compensation package is made far more attractive. The requirement, the need, the advisability of merging banks, 28 public sector banks, merging them to create larger banks, healthier banks, is being looked into. And the low-hanging fruit or the driving the thin edge of the wedge was when the associates and subsidiaries of the State Bank of India are being sought to be merged into the parent. Now, this was roughly around the time when the issue of demonetization hit us on November 8. Much can be said about the objectives or the advisability of bringing about demonetization. But we have to accept that the gray economy in the country was causing a huge amount of discomfort. It was just about equivalent to the regular economy itself. And somewhere we do need to have taken measures which would act as correctives. It was brought about, planned, conceptualized well, planned fairly well. Operationalization in these kind of situations always takes a beating. Not because you have not planned to execute it well, but for the fact that such initiatives have to come with an element of surprise, an element of ensuring that the public at large does not know what the government is going to pull out from its sleeves. There will be hiccups. We had those hiccups. There was pain in the short run, no doubt about that. But in the long run, hopefully, Q4 may not be very happy, but Q1 of 17-18, fiscal 17-18 certainly is going to be much better. And the economy, we will be seeing it back on track and delivering the kind that we were expecting it to deliver. There are a large number of other things which are in the works. I don't have time to bring out a whole laundry list of each of these. But what we need to do is to accept that we are at that threshold where if we lend our shoulders to the initiatives being taken, we cross that threshold and get onto a path which will bring us back again on a wider base, knocking on double-digit economic growth, which will be sustainable in the long run because it will be premised on an edifice which can certainly be called much better governance. So, while I stand before you, after I retired, I want to share with you the fact that after retirement, for about a year, I traveled quite a bit around the country, met with young entrepreneurs, associations of what is known as the YPOs, Young Presidents Organizations, associations of what is known as the Entrepreneurs Organizations, just about all the large cities of the country. And what was heartwarming was the fact that those young presidents in the age group 40-45 were all feeling that enough is enough. We are willing to play the game by the rules of the game. We are willing to stand in queue and await our turn. We don't want to take shortcuts because there is enough opportunity available to contribute to the economic growth of the country for each one of them. Some of them even went to the extent of saying that what their own elders or seniors had done in the company was not the best of things that had been done. And they were willing to put it aside and plan afresh along lines which could be called making their balance sheets not only healthy, but making their balance sheets healthy and ethical in a large number of ways. That is something which really warmed the heart. And I sincerely feel, I'm very upbeat about the fact, very bullish about the fact that Gen Next, people of your age, your disposition today, will certainly ensure that the correctives that have been taken will bear fruit and ensure that we deliver. Let me end by saying that economic growth for India is not really an option anymore. Economic growth of India is a compulsion today. It's a compulsion today because there is so much stake of so many people in the country that we do not ever have the facility or the liberty to fail in our quest for economic development. Let us all realize the fact that when posterity judges us, let posterity not say that when the challenge arose, we were found wanting. That will be a very sad commentary. And I wish to close by saying that maybe the story I've narrated, I'm not a good storyteller, but hopefully when the story of India is written, it will be written that India has gotten back into the path that we all wanted it to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you have time for questions, could you please line up here and then we can ask questions.
Good morning, Mr. Rai. This is about our erstwhile Chief Minister of Uttar Pradesh, Ms. Mayawati. This lady, she replicated herself. There were so many statues. Murtis, like a goddess. She was everywhere, elephants and statues of Bhagwan, both. That's fine. Elephants are beautiful. Since you're a controller, and how do they account for this kind of expenses? This was very expensive. This is not one spot. It's everywhere in UP.
Well, I was hoping that all the questions would be from the syllabus itself. This one seems to be slightly out of the syllabus, but let me try and tackle it. Please understand that we are in a parliamentary democracy. The parliament or the legislative assembly decides how much it is going to spend and on what it is going to spend. Now, the concerns of the kind that you just expressed, I must have got about 100 letters expressing this concern. We looked into it very closely. The budget documents all indicate that parks will be set up. Parks will have stone sculptures, parks will have green areas, parks will have waterways. That budget was passed by the Legislative Assembly of Uttar Pradesh. The auditor has no business to question what the Legislative Assembly has passed. So as long as the monies were spent on that park, you can't question it. So what we need to question today is the application of mind of those legislators who passed that budget. They probably never read it. He has authority, but he cannot question a budget which has been passed in Parliament or in the Legislative Assembly. That is the entire mandate or the prerogative of the Legislative Assembly itself.
Okay, with that question, I'll try to stick to the syllabus. I have two questions. One, you mentioned about the participation of common man in the budget. Is there a provision as of now where a common man who's not a legislator or associated with any of the organs of the government, does he have a say in the budget? Number one. Number two, what should we do, or what should, I know Supreme Court is a supreme interpreter of the land, the law of the land. What should a Supreme Court or the Supreme Court do if it's caught in a situation where it passed a judgment, however, it's not in the best interest of the people? For example, Jallikattu, should they overturn their own judgment? Or if they don't, is that because the ego has a play in it? Or is that because the Supreme Court, the Honorable Supreme Court, thinks that it can do anything and everything? Thank you.
I think the latter question should have been asked of Mr. Salve. Oh, you missed that session? Then please don't ask that question of the auditor. And then you'll say it will be the auditor's outreach. If I answer a question which is... Yeah, that's it. Well, you can't question the Supreme Court. In its own wisdom, it takes decisions which any point of time. It reviews by itself also. So, no. The Supreme Court looks at issues which are purely in legalistic fashion. The interest or otherwise depends upon where it is coming from. So it's, they are perfectly within the right to do. What was the first part of your question, sorry? Oh, yeah. Now, see, in a parliamentary democracy, it's not the common man who gets to write the budget. It's a representative of the common man who gets to put in his two bit into the budget, which is the member of parliament or maybe member of legislative assembly. So if a common man feels agitated or has a viewpoint on that, it's for him to approach his representative to have that issue put into the budget. But then, of course, there are a huge amount of competing demands upon budgetary resources. All of them do the same. All of them, the same avenue is available to them, but there are a huge amount of competing demands upon the resources in the budget. They may get included, they may not get included.
Great lecture, sir. You enjoyed listening about latest developments in economic reforms. I want to hear your vision of what economic reforms would you like to see in the next 10, 15 years. Thank you.
What I'd love to see? Well, see, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Economic development is an issue. All countries face similar situations. The solutions applicable to each of the countries is not what is different from each other. Maybe small customization of those solutions is all that is required. But what I'd like to see is, number one, huge amount of growth of physical infrastructure in the country. Any amount of resources, financial resources that we can bring about. Because my own feeling is that lack of physical infrastructure in the country is constraining growth. There's huge amount of resilience in production units or delivering units within the country, and we need to build up on that physical infrastructure in a huge amount of time. But more importantly, each of these activities needs to be done in a very transparent kind of a fashion, where you and I get to see what were the issues that had been discussed, debated, as a consequence of which the decision was taken the way it was taken. So, economic growth, but in which accessibility to hitherto areas or public who have not had the benefits of economic development or economic growth get to them, being brought in, especially in social sector areas like health and education.
So, with your role in the government, you exposed very large corruption cases and you shared how much money we lost in the past with 2G scam, Commonwealth Games, etc., etc. Is there an authority or a government organization that can help us stop or monitor monitor such activities or big spending, initiatives by government in present and in future?
Most certainly so. Most certainly so. See, an element of vigilance which can be introduced by, on the one hand, having a very discerning populace, as I called, or on the other hand, ensuring that decisions taken by government are taken very transparently. The moment we can ensure that these two elements happen, and the person who is sitting in authority actually is cognizant of the fact that he better deliver with transparency and probity, otherwise he will be held accountable for it. I think that feeling is enough. And that feeling seems to have come about, whether it was media pressure, whether it was audit, whether it was public, whether it was parliament, whether it was the Public Accounts Committee, or the judiciary. I think that feeling has come about, and I think we are on that track where hopefully questions will be taken, decisions will be taken with no gray area around them. Simple examples are the electronic auctions of 3G, subsequent auctions of coal mines. No fingers have been raised anywhere. It was done with a great degree of transparency, and that is the best that we can do for good governance in the country.
My name is Kriyash. I'm a student at Boston University. My question for you is, why is it that we have a disparity between the way policy is progressing and the regulation is not following along the same right? So policy is intending it to make it easier for the smaller businessmen to operate, but regulations are increasingly complicated in the commercial banking sector. I believe Mr. Salve also mentioned that we rank pretty low on the ease of business rankings. Where do you see this going in the future? And is this something that is holding us back as well?
Ease of doing business is not something which is, our position from being 142 in the country to in the world to becoming 120 in the country will happen overnight. But I can assure you that we are very much on the path of ensuring that business or development of business, setting up of business in the country becomes very much simpler than what it was earlier. As I mentioned to you, I didn't want to go into the laundry list of whatever we had in about 30 minutes of time I had, but whether it's Make in India or Stand Up India or whatever, each of these initiatives that have been taken, each one of them has a very positive spin-off. The only thing is we need to give it time for each of these initiatives, for the roadmap to be rolled out at the field level, so that you and I, when we are taking a decision, we do face a bureaucracy which gets attuned to this kind of a change. It's not easy to do that. As I said, it doesn't happen overnight. If I see my past slipping away from my hand, it's not going to be easy for me to let that happen. But happen it will. It will happen over a period of time. That's about all.
Two more questions, please.
Hi, Mr. Vinod. My name is Sakshi. I just have two short questions. The first one is, for those of us who are interested in development finance, what kind of organizations do you think are promising in India that we can aspire to work towards? And the second question is, what do you think is the future of the new development bank that's been formed in Shanghai with the other BRIC countries that is being led by Mr. Kamath?
Thanks, Sakshi. I mentioned to you that India lacks physical infrastructure. We did experiment with development finance institutions sometimes in the 80s and late 90s. If you remember, it was IDBI, IFCI, and things of that kind. Some point of time, that model stopped delivering, and we had to switch to more banking and other kinds of financing modules. But time has come when we have to ensure that we get long tenor money coming into physical infrastructure development. And I think with the innovative kind of ideas that youngsters like you would have gained in maybe in the US, or you just mentioned that you were in Singapore, you can come back to the country and innovate on those or build up on those, that expertise. There are a large number of institutions which have been floated by government today, There are a large number of initiatives which have been taken by the private sector today, and I think you can, with your expertise, build upon that and help create more avenues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rai. It's such an honor to be here to listen to your speech. And also proud to know that you are an alumni of one of the most important schools, which is the Harvard Kennedy School, of course. And I'm a politician from Bhutan. My question is, when we try to get things done, the bureaucracy always comes back with the excuse saying that, oh, we're going to get a memo from the auditors, so we can't get it done. So there always seems to be that vicious cycle of how do you then really draw a line of what an intention, good intention is to execute and implement a public policy versus sticking to the rules that the auditors will really insist upon. Thank you.
Each one of us gets a bureaucracy, which I guess we deserve. But at the same point of time, I must tell you, bureaucracy per se cannot be the stumbling block. Bureaucracy, I would divide bureaucracy into three categories. 20% pure white. They will never do a wrong thing, never allow a wrong to be done, but at the same time, never do anything. Then you have 20% black. They will never do a right thing. If you want to do, they will always tell you the shortcuts. And they keep waiting for opportunities to hang on to the coattails of somebody who's going to make a quick buck and provide them avenues to do that. But the bulk of your bureaucracy, 60% of it, are those who keep waiting for the right signals to ensure that they lend their shoulder into that. And they are the right people, because in any setup, it's 30% of the people who do 70% of the work. And it's this 30% of the people who actually deliver. So if you have this 60% of the bureaucracy, which is dynamic, is willing to take initiative, and is willing to conform or respond to the good signals which are coming from the top, they can deliver. It's very easy. We've seen it all happen. And I think pan-bureaucracy, you can't say it is a stumbling block. There are people, and I just mentioned a while back, that it's very difficult for a person sitting in power to see his power slip away from his hands. But then there are that 60% which I talked about who can deliver, have a positive attitude, and I'm sure they are the ones who are going to make the difference in times to come.
Thank you. Let's stay back on stage.